So right now, it is time to bring in, of course, David Tereshchuk. David Tereshchuk with the Media Beat joins us every Friday morning. You can find David, of course, at his own website, themediabeat.us. He is also a PBS television correspondent reporting on ethics and belief, and we are lucky to have him on a Friday morning talking about things in the media and about the media. Good morning, David.
Good morning from the very wet media capital of the world, New York City. It's wet, wet, wet here.
Well, you know, it's wet, wet, wet all over. Of course, the big thing, the big elephant in the room finally opened the door and came into the room. We now have 20 or 21 Democrats are running for President of the United States on the Democratic side. Isn't
elephant entirely the wrong animal for the Democratic side of the political divide?
I think the reason I used it is because the elephant we used to remember as a Republican Party is a no. I think now the ass goes to the Republican side.
That's a neat switch.
And the elephant has to come to the Democratic side. But anyways, Joe Biden enters, and once again, it's like there's chum in the water for a shark.
That could well be. There's an awful lot about Joe. Well, Joe Biden's had a very, very long history.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary to become a U.S. Senator at the age of 29. So there's a lot of him on the political record. And, of course, if you're a target like that, I mean, not so much an elephant as a kind of a leviathan in the water. And as you say, it will excite the bloodlust of many a Republican, I think. But of course, he's likely to come under attack from the more leftist elements of the Democratic Party too, more left than he, that is. And I'm sure he's aware of it, and his supporters are aware of it, and we can look forward to some agitated and agitating political debate about his candidacy. And we've already had it. We've gone right back to the Anita Hill case during the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings, which, of course, Joe Biden chaired, and not especially sympathetically to Anita Hill at all. And that looks really bad from the perspective of today and the Me Too movement. And indeed, Anita Hill has already made that clear by saying that she was happy to have content to have the phone call he made to her by way of a kind of apology. But she said that's not enough. He needs to generalize his position and make sure that women generally are supported in their opposition to the sexual harassment that they've been subjected to.
Well, just, the media frenzy that goes out there when they see something that they can latch onto and possibly get ratings on are pretty amazing. I mean, I can talk about Joe Biden getting in. I can talk about now with Bernie Sanders, as everybody knows Bernie Sanders. He's been Bernie Sanders forever. So they can't go back and really question his record because it's already been done. So they're looking for other things, like he got booed the other day. Well, that was a major story. Well, this is
sure.
Not. Yeah.
I don't think Bernie Sanders in the last few years, and particularly the audience he's been speaking at, has been accustomed to boos. But of course, every politician will encounter boos occasionally, if not occasionally, perhaps very often. And I don't think Bernie Sanders getting booed is exactly front page news.
No, but it's part of the media frenzy thing. And Joe and I were both talking about this, and we'll bring up. I'm going to bring up Kate Smith and the song "God Bless America." To me, at 66 years of age, you separate the singer from the song. The song was not written by Kate Smith. The song happened to be sung successfully by Kate Smith. And when she sang that song and went out to raise funds for the military effort, she raised, in today's total, would be like $1.5 billion. She raised $600 million for the war effort. Now, there's the other side of Kate Smith, which is a nasty, horrible side. There's no doubt about it. But does that mean you take the song that she happened to sing and say, okay, that song is no longer playable? Does that happen when they took down her statue in front of the stadium for, I think it's the Link for Philadelphia? Is this overreaction? Like, is taking down every statue an overreaction? It's all in the same thing, but it's all in the way the media covers it too, as well.
Well, sure. I mean, you get a wave, and a wave is amplified through social media as well as mainstream media, and you'll end up with these movements. I mean, sometimes slightly more emphatic in their effect than was ever intended by the people who started them. It was sometimes absolutely in line, effectively, with what the originators would have intended, but often not. They do have a tendency to get out of hand.
Yeah, it's just one of those things that you look at that I think, and that's the problem in this country nowadays, and probably in the world. It's a too much in the moment thing, and you have to try to cover every aspect of whatever the story is that breaks. And in today's society, if you're a news organization that has an all news outlet like CNN or MSNBC or Fox, by God, you get every angle looked at every damn story.
Sure. But I mean, there is an underlying truth, of course, that America, the beautiful, is not necessarily all that resonant for a large number of Americans. I mean, a lot of Americans would say that. In fact, a lot of Americans have said that this, irrespective of the objectionable nature of Kate Smith as an individual, that song that is so identified with her, written by Cole Porter of all people, doesn't really apply to their own life experience as Americans, especially as poor Americans. And so, I mean, that's a justifiable argument. But of course, the frenzy that is built up is the kind of ugly side of that, I think.
You take a look at the national anthem, but you get a couple of stanzas into the national anthem, and all of a sudden, it's like the old Monty Python lumberjack song. You start singing some of those things, and you're singing and say, "What the hell is this?" God,
Right. Well, I mean, I spent many years of my life singing, or at least humming along sometimes with Britain's "God Save the Queen," and some of the lyrics in that are a pretty nasty imperialistic hubris that would make anyone feel uncomfortable now if they stop to think about them.
Well, we can take a broader scope and take a look at what's going on in the world, and you have to bring up the horrible terrorist attack in Sri Lanka, which just claimed an inordinately high number of lives, and to find out later that basically the government knew it was coming.
Elements of the government did, yeah, and that's testimony to the fractured nature of that country's governance. I've reported from there once, and that was during the Civil War, which had so much impact upon the country's governance that I think in some ways it's responsible for the terrible mess in terms of security that we're witnessing now. The presidents, you end up, because of fractiousness between elements of the Sri Lankan population, you've ended up with a constitution that gives power to both the president and the prime minister. And that central division between political forces inside the entire government apparatus of Sri Lanka is responsible for the warnings that were given ahead of this terrorist outrage or set of outrages, ended up being taken in, but not widely disseminated. In fact, it was kept one side of the political divide only, and as a result, no action was taken on it. And now, of course, heads are meant to roll in terms of political appointees. And it's an ugly result of a very ugly act, set of acts.
You know, when you look at the news stories across the world, you've got that. You have so many other big stories that are breaking. Of course, North Korea meeting with not only with Russia this time, not over China. And I look at the main headlines on the mainstream networks. Congressman threatens Trump officials with jail. Trump sent 3 tweets on the Mueller probe, getting 6 facts wrong. These are not the lead stories that should come from major news organizations. Especially, like I said, you've got North Korea now using Donald Trump as a stepping stone to go out and actually greet other countries and become an active participating member of the world political stage.
And President Xi was mentioned within that context as well.
I mean,
working on the North Korean border. The thing that I find so amazing, and I always come up with this one, is history begins at the point in time most convenient to the argument. And that's not mine.
Isn't that always true?
Yeah,
yes.
But that's Teddy Sorensen wrote that in, I don't know, 19-something. Of course, most of the people listening have no idea who.
1960s, I believe.
Yeah,
but,
and
I could be wrong.
Yeah, I think it was the mid-60s. But I have Google. But as I said, many people listening below the age of what? X decades.
When does it? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, oh,
when does history begin?
And the important thing.
Rather recently, I suspect.
Yeah, and so this is the first time there's been activism. Our movie critic reviewed Peterloo yesterday. And that was 18 what? And that was
1815, yes.
1815. All right, so that's 204 years ago. And it's a bunch of people basically having a peaceful protest for democracy getting their butts kicked.
Getting killed.
Yeah.
In great numbers.
Yeah, in great numbers. But again.
By soldiers.
By soldiers. Yeah. Hello? So,
well, how about the story we talked?
You don't have to be a cynic to find that there are resonances again and again of events like that. In fact, it so happens I've just been writing about a whole chain of them. As you guys know well, I was an eyewitness to Bloody Sunday, in Northern Ireland, where exactly the same thing happened. Peaceful protest, outburst of shooting by the National Army, and in that case, 13 deaths. In the case of Peterloo, there were about 48 deaths, I believe. I'm a little shaky on that number. And of course, his historical record is a little shaky too, because there were many deaths in time after the Peterloo massacre, which took place, by the way, in my old hometown of Manchester, a hotbed of activity and activism for reform, which resulted in the heavy-handed military reaction. But the repetition of this template, if you will, is something that we're all too familiar with if we pay attention to history. And if we don't pay attention to history, we're taken by terrible surprise and shock every time this kind of thing happens. But there is a pattern to discern, of course, and regimes that can only keep their populations in order by shooting them are decried all over the place. But it's woven into our own history. That's something we must never forget, and it can so easily happen.
Well, look at the news that has been conveniently bypassed over the past couple of days, where our forays, our joint forays, have ended up killing which far more just residents than.
In Afghanistan, the kill rate, if I can use that ugly term, is higher, emanating from the NATO allied side, including ourselves, against civilians in Afghanistan than the number of people killed by the Taliban in the last year. So that's an ugly truth too.
Yeah. I mean, those things float around out there, and to be quite honest with you, I think they are far more important than the prickly little stories we get out of Washington D.C. on a daily basis, which which I can't believe.
Oh, sure.
I can't.
The political infighting of one particular country and one particular section, if you like, of one particular country, seen from within is really
yawn-inducing.
Like inside baseball. And sometimes so petty, it makes you want to throw up.
But you also wonder.
Now you sound like me.
I just can't understand. I can't understand where. Enough is enough. Do people really want to hear these things
for another year?
Not only hear them just mentioned once, but then there's group panels of people that discuss tweets. There's panels of people that discuss. I mean, it's absolutely.
Oh, the whole industry of dissection of presidential tweets. It's something. Who would have thought?
Right.
That's all I can say.
But what?
Yes, a panel of 10 people dissecting 280 character messages from someone who doesn't seem very stable, despite the fact that he claims to be a stable genius. That's part of the
deflection,
journalistic analysis of our country's body politic now. It's something else that makes me want to throw up.
You know what? I'd like to see. I'd like to see some network get a forum of historians, and I'm talking about historians that are neither Republican nor Democrat, but that have written about the history of the United States, the history of the United States government, and present the fact what the president is doing right now with the Congress, how it sits in history. That's a different conversation. That's a conversation that I could listen to, and you can get comparisons to. But right now, we just don't get that. That this country is far more than in trouble than just tweets. You actually have the executive branch now formally challenging the Congress and trying to, in huge chunks, take away oversight, which is simply an amazing thing, and yet it sits there and nobody talks about it as being an amazing power play.
Yeah, but that's the power. See, this is where politics versus, and Marshall explained this to me the other day because I was unhinged about something that once again, it defaults to if you really want something to work, if you really want to solve something, obviously you wouldn't be taking these steps. It's like saying, well, I want to make sure the dog is safe, and then opening all the doors and going to sleep for 20 minutes. This is the sort of problem solving that's presented in a news story. It's like, and I was just mad about why. And he said, well, look, nobody's actually trying to solve this. And I was thinking, oh, yeah, right. This is just to keep people... This is just...
It's an occasion for venting, which, of course, is what a lot of the mass media cast themselves in the role of doing now. We're here, we're offering a platform, that terrible weasel word. And what it is it's not a platform for ideas for solutions. It's a platform for venting people's emotions. And how useful is that, we can ask.
You just look at all the important things that the media can try to focus people on, and take away the showbiz aspect of it. There's really a lot of very important stuff going on right now in the free world and beyond that has huge implications for 10 and 20 years down the line. And nobody is really covering that. I mean, what's going on with Brexit? What's going on with in England with a power struggle that's not a power struggle, it seems. What's going on in the United States and basically Germany, and how this all focuses. And you look at the Soviet Union and China, and there are major ramifications.
Former Soviet Union.
Yeah, well, it's back to the Soviet Union again.
Well, and we got to talk about the winner of the Ukraine president. No, really.
Yeah, but it sets the Ukraine's right in there with it. It sets a precedent. You can't, once you go through 4 years of certain policy change and the way your country stands in the world, it takes a long time to rebound from that.
Sure.
Now
Yeah,
you don't talk about it.
we're talking about things, lots of frenzy in the moment, but the cumulative effect of all of this, of course, can it's like turning a massive, great oil tanker or something like as big as that at sea by just a few degrees, and then you end up decades later with your course going way, way off what any politician in a representative role would ever have wanted to take the country at the beginning of all that. And these things do play out over time in bigger ways than we would ever expect when we see the irritating small arguments start up in the first place.
The way I look at these things now and what's going on in the country and the world is I once went to an AA meeting for family members of people that have dependency problems. And they had a speaker there, and he said what most people don't realize is when you're an alcoholic or a drug abuser, it's like walking into a forest. And you've walked into the forest, and you've kept walking into the forest, and you're in the middle of the forest, and now you have to find your way out. Once you get this deep into something, it is not a 1 day, a 2 day, a 3 day, a 1 year, or a 2 year thing. It all of a sudden it's long term to retrace your steps and get to where you should be. And nobody, and I mean nobody right now, is looking at the long term of what's going on.
It's an interesting kind of image for you to bring up there. And in a way, we're right back to where we started with our conversation this morning, Marshall. There is, I have to say, at the forefront of political attention right now, someone who is making that similar analogy. And that's Mr. Biden himself. He said, it's an important, this is now a battle for the soul of this nation, and it's an interesting political analysis he puts up. Is that if we let it become just, if we work to ensure at least that the Trump era ends at 4 years, then we have some chance of saving the country, or saving the country's soul, as he would put it. If, however, we allow it to become a two-term presidency as the American electorate, then we will need to look forward to, and not in the sense of looking forward with anticipation, but looking forward with regret, I imagine, to a major change to the kind of country that America is, that down the road, the lasting impact of Trumpism over 8 years will be enormously bigger than what has already been set in motion by, almost 4 years.
Yep. And, of course, before we can get to that, we've got to watch the nasty war between, let's call them the front runners, which is going to distract from the front runners of the Democrats for the nomination, which is apt to distract from any other actual news.
Every primary contest is going to be ugly in the sense that people are going to have to get very brutal with each other. I mean, a political fight is a fight after all. I suspect that. I don't suspect. We can all see that there's a strong danger that the Democrats, and it is the Democrats' responsibility here to handle their own internal divisions in such a way as to ensure that there's healthy political debate, but that they don't destroy themselves in the process.
And
there is.
And step in here and step in here and say, how about the people there's so many people that are in office that are running for president. Put your running for president aside for a while and
do your work.
Come back to Washington and do your work. Republicans, come back to Washington and don't give up the power or cede the power to the executive branch of the Congress. Democrats, come back and, yes, do your oversight, of course, and put other bills together. Can't we just, put off this politicking? And if you want to raise money at this time, fine. But put off your politicking and let's see if we can make a step to solve some of those problems.
Because I just have to interject. Do you know how many days from now the actual 2020 election is?
It's 2 years?
In days, it's just even more humorous. 557.
Yeah.
It's like, are we really going to have this freaking conversation?
Yeah, there is a countdown clock along the riverside here in New York. I can see that most days.
At least we call it not project, right?
But it's very big.
How many pharmaceuticals does that sell?
550 also, yeah.
557.
That's what we're looking at.
Yep. Well,
can't get away from it.
Get sunglasses or something. All right. You know what I have to say?
Well, 7 days from now, the number will be different, and we'll be talking about pretty much the same thing, I guess.
You've got that entirely right. All right. I have to say this. I can't bear it. Thank you very much, David Tereshchuk, the Media Beat.
Thank you.